Today we're going to take a look at integrating RadBulletGraph with RadGridView. As a reminder, both RadBulletGraph and RadGridView are part of the Telerik Rad controls for Silverlight and Rad controls for WPF control suites for .NET XAML development. In today's video, first we're going to create a RadGridView for displaying some data. Then of course we're going to create some sample data for showing within RadGridView. We'll take a quick look at how that looks in RadGridView by default. And then finally, we're going to look at what happens when we integrate RadBulletGraph via templating into RadGridView to give a much better view of our data through simple and quick data visualizations. I've already started a brand new project with the Telerik Visual Studio extensions, so we can see we have all the assemblies that we need to reference for this project over here, and we can actually just start to code in our XAML. As I mentioned, first thing I want to do is create a brand new Telerik RadGridView. So we'll say Telerik RadGridView, give it a name, XRadGridView. And for right now, that's all I'm actually going to want to do. Everything else we're going to handle in code via our sample data. So we have a RadGridView. If I start the project, you will see the same thing as in this design surface, but we'll make it a little bit more exciting with some data. For this, I step into my code behind, and of course I want to add a brand new class, grid sample item. And here we want to give a public int ID with our getter and setter. We're going to say public int feature. Since we know this will go for the featured measure. Public int compare. This is going to be for our comparative measure. And public int projected. You guessed it, this will be for the projected value. Make our constructor. Don't really need to do anything in there. And then we can go back into our main page and set up a new loaded event. List loaded. Here we're going to go ahead and actually create our sample data. Now for this example, we don't need anything too fancy, so we'll just say list grid sample item grid samples equals brand new list of grid sample item. We'll need a random to keep things fun, and we'll do a quick for loop. So we'll say we'll do 10 items just to keep it nice and easy. Now here we want to say grid sample item GSI equals brand new grid sample item. The ID will be set based on the I value for the for loop. The featured measure .feature will be in random.next, and we'll give ourselves a bit of a range, say 40 to 70. The GSI.comparative measure will be another random.next. This one will make a little bit higher, so we'll say 60 to 90. And our GSI.projected will be based on the GSI feature, GSI.feature plus 25. So it's always going to be within a nice range, but always higher than our feature, because you would never want your projected measure to be below your feature. That would be some really quirky numbers you're working with. Next, of course, grid samples has to add this, so grid samples.add GSI. And last but not least, XRadGridView.item source is going to be that grid samples. Go ahead and save this, and when I run it, you're going to see what happens with RadGridView automatically implementing these fields in brand new columns that we'll be displaying. So as you can see, this is a pretty neat look on our data. RadGridView automatically takes all the data, shows all our numbers in nice columns based on the property that we're using. So we have our ID, feature, compare, and projected. But imagine this once you go from 10 rows to maybe 100 or 1,000, or maybe you're making some insane application with 10,000 rows. It's not going to be really easy to compare any two rows, but thankfully we have an answer for that. So we're going to go ahead and close up Internet Explorer. We don't have to touch anything else in our code, so we can close this window up. And everything else we want to do is within RadGridView. So first up, we say auto-generate columns is false. We want to go ahead and define them ourselves. And we'll say Telerik RadGridView.columns to enter that collection. We want to make a brand new GridView data column. Header on this one will be ID and data member binding ID. So now that's going to be displaying. Now we want to make a brand new column that's going to feature our RadBulletGraph. We'll use a GridView data column once again. Header will be graph, just so we know what's going on. And I'm going to go ahead and set this as is read only, true, because we're going to be putting multiple values into our BulletGraph. So if we do a single edit, there's not exactly one value we can edit. Now you can go ahead and construct a cell edit template to put all three values within there. That's definitely within the scope of what you can do in RadGridView, but it's out of the scope of this video. So it's a feature we can cover a little down the road. We want to set the Telerik GridView data column cell template. This is of course a data template. And within this, we want to set a rad horizontal bullet graph. Now, we have a few settings we want to put on here just to make sure everything is displaying nicely. So we'll start off with a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 100. And we want this to actually display in kind of a nice manner. So we'll go ahead and give it a height of 40, give ourselves a little bit of space. And a margin, we want 10 pixels on either side and maybe 3 on the top and bottom. But now, of course, we want to tie some data to this. So we have our featured measure, which would be a quick binding to our feature property, our comparative measure, another quick binding to compare, and our projected value, binding to projected. Now, one last thing I want to do, which I didn't do previously, is set a width on this column. So we kind of want to go for the default width of 200. We think that'll give a good view on our data. Go ahead, save this, run it one more time, and now we're going to see our RadGridView, except slightly enhanced. So, because instead of using the auto-generated columns, we've said RadGridView, we want to display our data in a certain way. And here we can see we have our same 10 rows, except now all our values are displayed with a RadBulletGraph. And the neat thing is, maybe I'm sitting here saying, well, I can't really tell where these values are at. Maybe I want a little better view. Since RadBulletGraph is adaptive to the size of the container it's within, I can go ahead and stretch this column out and get a much better view of our data. So now I know that this projected value is almost at 90, this one a little over 85, this one between 65 and 70. So maybe whatever ID 5 is needs a little bit of help. But as you can see, it only took a few minutes and a couple lines of XAML to add this rich data visualization effect to our grid, greatly enhancing our user experience of evaluating data within our application. So I hope you've seen how quickly and easily you can integrate RadBulletGraph with RadGridView, and I hope you stay tuned for more videos in Telerik Rad Controls and WPF Control Suite's video library.